Okay, so let's just start. So welcome everybody. So let me first introduce to you Aya Soma. And Aya, this is part of our Sangha participants who've come tonight. And we've been doing that since the beginning of the lockdown. We've been actually having the guided meditations online and actually the whole monastery program, as you have done as well. So anybody who's interested, this is a very good program with a lot of Dhamma talks on Buddhist insights, which is, I think it's not on Zoom, but on YouTube, is it? Yes, okay. So let me first introduce you, Aya Soma. See, I'll just read the bio that is also sent to you on the website. So Aya Soma is an Italian Buddhist monk living at Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey. As the co-founder of Buddhist Insights, a non-profit organization connecting people with monastics, she has learned the Dhamma through the perspective of monks of all different traditions and incorporates aspects from all of them in her own practice. Her spiritual path is inspired by the social engagement of her preceptor, Venerable Panyavati Bhikkhuni. So that we've seen Venerable Panyavati a couple of weeks ago, is talking about Black Lives Matter protests and Buddhist perspective on that. So, and also by the knowledge and wisdom of Venerable Robina Curtin and by the compassion of Kenmo Droma. So I have met Aya Soma in New York last year. I went there in January and also in May, but especially in January. And the monastery wasn't there yet then. It was a house on Long Island and is very close actually to the airport. So when you're doing metta meditation, you sometimes have to stop and wait for the airplane to come by or start sending metta up. But I was so amazed by this project that they're doing for a couple of reasons. Well, one of the first things was that when I came there, there's also a monk there who's also the co-founder of Buddhist Insights, and Venerable Sudaso, and he immediately said, well, you go first in line for food. And I was so surprised because that has never, I said to him, that's never happened to me before. He said, I know, that's why I'm doing it. And it's just, I felt immediately at home, and I thought like, wow, this is great. And I felt, oh, Aya Soma, she is so lucky to be living in a place like this, where this is where there is just not this discrimination that I've seen everywhere else. And and then the whole place, also the people that come are from just every walk of life, all races, colors, genders, whatever. And it's just so nice to see how that is possible. Well, I have not seen that in many other places. So that's a bit of an introduction, and Aya Soma is going to lead a guided meditation first for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion about the gender in Buddhism. She's also given a talk about it, which I put on the website and Facebook, so you could have listened to that beforehand if some of you might have done. And so we'll talk about that subject together and our own experience, share our experiences. So Aya, can I ask you to unmute and start a guided meditation?
All right, well, thank you for the kind introduction, Venerable, and good to see you, to meet you all. I actually virtually know Helen from social media, so it's good to see you live. And I'm happy. Thanks for the invitation. I also watched, not live, but the recording of my preceptor when she came to Tilorien. So I've been watching you all from afar. Sometimes the time doesn't work terribly well for us to be online at the same time, but I'm really happy and grateful that you have been that Tilorien has been there for the community, providing all this Dhamma talk. So it's wonderful. All right, so maybe we can start with some meditation practice. So we can, if we're not in a comfortable position already, we can find, we can get into one. Making sure that our back is up straight. We can take a few deep breaths, closing our eyes. We can start by relaxing our entire body from the top of the head to the tip of the toes. Relaxing our forehead, our face, the jaw, relaxing the throat, the shoulders, the belly. Relaxing our arms and legs, the feet, relaxing the breath. Then we can take a few moments to acknowledge the state of mind that we're in. Whether we feel happy or we feel sad, or perhaps we feel tired or anxious or relaxed. Whatever state of mind we have, we can acknowledge it. And let go of any label or idea or story we have about our experience. And just see, how does this state of mind feel like in the body? And we will usually see, feel something, sensation in the body, normally in the torso or perhaps in the throat. Sometimes there can be tension even in the jaw. Or perhaps there's a bit of tightness in the belly. It doesn't matter the reason why it's there. All we want to do is acknowledge that is there. and look at it with deep curiosity. What does it feel like? Letting go of any type, any attempt to label our experience intellectually, but just staying with the raw data, the experience, the bodily feeling of our emotions. Perhaps it's a tingling sensation. Perhaps it's a constricting sensation. Whatever it is, we just look at it with deep curiosity, like it was the most important thing in the world to fully see and understand. As we keep watching our experience, we'll see that it's constantly changing. What perhaps we thought had some stability is actually taking new shapes and forms. What was perhaps a tingling sensation has become smooth or piercing. What was piercing has disappeared entirely and changed perhaps into something else. And all we do, our only duty, is to watch, to know, and see how our experience is changing in every moment, without wanting for any feeling to persist, any pleasant feeling to persist, or any unpleasant feeling to go away, but watching all these feelings as impermanent, whether they're pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And the more we watch carefully, the more we see how we have no control towards each emotion that is appearing in the mind. There are so many causes and conditions that come into being. If we want for a pleasant feeling to persist, eventually it will turn into something else. If we want for an unpleasant feeling not to be there, we can't control for it to disappear. So how can these emotions be who we are? How can they be ours if we have no control towards them? Why should they be a problem? So we can reflect and contemplate how this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. It's only suffering arising and suffering ceasing. It is not a problem. It's only a problem when we make it into a problem. And as we come close to the end of our meditation practice, we can see how the mind becomes more and more content when we allow for things to be just the way they are without wanting them to be different, but just looking at our experience, watching our experience, and knowing our experience. And we can wish for ourselves and for all beings to be happy, peaceful and safe. And we can start by opening slowly our eyes. And we can all relax and stretch if we need to. And start our perhaps Dhamma conversation in a while.
Thank you so much, Aya.
Thank you.
Very nice. I have the feeling I have to let people come out a little bit before starting a topic like this, actually.
Yeah, we can all take our time.
Yes. Yeah, I was listening to your talk that's online on this topic, gender in Buddhism, because it's a topic that I have written quite extensively about, also talked a lot about, not so much online, but I basically started off with like showing the various documentaries about bhikkhuni ordination that there is, and doing screenings of that in various places, and then also telling a bit more about my own experiences to make people more aware of the problems that the bhikkhuni order is facing. And later on, I also came to know, it's like, well, the same kind of problems are also faced by another group of people, especially LGBTIQ. So I was listening to your talk, and I like hear exactly the same kind of things coming up again. And for me, it was very much like, especially in the beginning, you're sort of new to Buddhism and you think like, well, okay, this is what it is. And you take it all in your stride and you think, well, that's the Buddhist teachings is about non-self and blah, blah, blah. But after a while, you start to notice how these things start to affect you, and that it's not really helpful at all for your practice. And actually that it's very negative for your practice in some ways as well. And so that's what I heard you say as well in your talk. You'll want to say a bit more about that also for the people that haven't watched your talk?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's been an interesting journey. It still is. So my background, my previous life within this life, I used to work in the fashion industry in a particular field, which is the editorial side of the fashion industry, where it's all women in power. And if it's not women, it's gay men for the most part. So gender was not really that much something that I ever thought about, that was ever presented to me as an obstacle for anything. And even actually my mom, even though Italy is not exactly the most forward-thinking country in Europe in terms of gender equality, it's not as bad as a lot of places in the world, but as other places in the world, but it's still, let's say, I think the southern you get in Europe, the more kind of troglodyte, as I say, we are. The more north you get, the more there is on a lot of different actually issues. But my particular experience growing up in Italy was with a very strong mother figure that never really gave me any sort of, instilled any kind of ideas that there was, that my role in society was of any shape or form. Like, she never told me that I was supposed to, you know, be a mother with children. I think she probably assumed that that's what I would have done, but that's a different story. But she never raised me with that idea, but rather she always encouraged me to study, to learn, to get an education, to really you know, look to create a career for myself. You know, different values, no different than how she raised my brothers. I have 2 older brothers. And then obviously the rest of my adult life was when I went into that industry, it was just not a problem being a female. So when I approached Buddhist practice, as you mentioned, it's also presented in a very, even like further than that, you know, so there's the concept of non-self altogether. Excuse me. So at the very beginning, I started an organization as a layperson, actually, with Bhante Sudaso, and so Buddhist Insights, with the purpose of connecting people with monastics. And it was the first time that I was in a sort of environment that was slightly more mainstream than the fashion industry in Milan, New York City, and London, and Paris. And it was funny because I started seeing how certain people would relate to me. And at the very beginning, I was like, these people are really nice, but sometimes they're actually really unpleasant and really not nice to me, but they're kind of nice in general. So anyway, long story short, it was a bit of a journey for me to realize that certain people were treating me in a particular way based on the way that I looked. So that it wasn't necessarily that they were bad people, that there was anything unwholesome. If anything, actually, they were in a Buddhist center where they were trying to, you know, become better people, or they were very faithful and devout. But they were relating to me in a specific way and having assumptions on who I was and what my role in the organization was based on the shape and form of my body. And it was a bit of a journey, actually, for me, like until I actually put robes on. There was still a bit of denial, or like, you know, I thought I was on the path towards awakening, but I had to get woke in the meanwhile first. And just understanding a little bit more these dynamics, and also what it meant that my actions having this shape and form also sent a message to people at large of the capabilities of women. And then, of course, once I put robes on, my life shifted altogether. And it's, for the most part, I have to say that the pressure has always come from outside. I mean, I never had gender dysphoria, so I never had a problem, you know, checking the box of female, but it's also never something that I thought about. I was never, you know, identifying. And actually, I think, Venerable, we had some conversations the first time I met you on that topic when it was a little bit less woke than these days, where I wasn't particularly seeing even the benefit of sort of relating with other, like in a sort of exclusively female environment. There are lots of different things that just weren't back then something that I thought was relevant or I saw any meaning. But the more this sort of gender identity was coming more from the outside, the more it was something that I needed to acknowledge and understand and figure out what are the implications. There are also some problematic passages actually in the suttas, so in sacred texts that are attributed to the Buddha that are quite misogynistic and quite, you know, strong statements about this particular attributes that I think we all have a similar body, so so it's like all of a sudden, so there's no self, but apparently there is this characteristic, like specific identity that doesn't seem. Everybody tells you that you know, women have the capability of awakening, but yet there is these like really strong characteristics that apparently are the antithesis for awakening. So it's been a journey. I am still in the process of, to be quite frank, to figure it out myself. And of course, I have the privilege to run my own organization, as we joke here, like there a lot of monastics, you know, try, like they start and they go novice and then they go up and then they become abbot. I'm like, I feel like I am trying so hard to do the other way around to actually be able to have zero responsibilities. So my current role comes with both pros and cons. So on one hand, it's a little bit difficult because even though I'm a junior monastic, I have lots of responsibilities, but at the same time, it also means that contrarily to a lot of other female monastics, I live in a sort of more sane environment where, you know, the inferiority of my gender, quote unquote, is not like presented to me on a daily basis. I am not pushed to put in a certain position in line or in wherever it is. And that has been probably the reason why actually I'm still in robes. There have been times where I have gone, actually prior to the pandemic, that would happen relatively often. And in February, I was in Thailand for 2 weeks, which was fantastic, an incredible experience, but also extremely problematic at times, to the point where I actually really considered about disrobing, not having the strength, I'll be quite frank, to deal with this situation. Because as you said, at a certain point, I was like, I don't know if this is really the path towards awakening as a female monastic. It seems like more the path towards craziness, because not of never doubting the teachings of the Buddha, but doubting how this form could actually be helpful in going forth. And what has been a really precious teaching, actually, especially when I was in Thailand, was realizing how permeable the mind is to the outside environment, and how most of the time we think that we are, you know, that our emotions, like we did in meditations, meditation, are ours, but also our ideas, how we think that we are, you know, woke and like independent women and very strong. And all of these ideas are ours, but when we are thrown in an environment where it starts telling us the exact opposite, those thoughts start permeating our mind. And, you know, actually, I just turned 39. And in the first 38 years of my life, I never thought once, never even like popped into my mind to ask the question, am I inferior to a male? Like, do I not have the capabilities of doing something like my brothers? Never. But it did appear to me, once I was in this form, in the past year, like after a while, I was like, is there some truth? Is what, you know, have been presented from around, is this really true? And being obviously in Thailand, where everything is institutionalized, that's where I started thinking, I started acting like an inferior being. And that's when I became extremely alarmed. I was like, the thoughts that are around, it was an incredible teaching, you know, the Buddha in real life. I was like, oh, this is not mine, this is not me, this is not who I am. It is just currently present. And because I am not protecting my mind in every single moment, I'm protecting my mind parts of the time, then all these thoughts and ideas are permeating my mind. And I'm starting to believe in this cultural conditioning. So you know, it's been quite shaky. And I have to say that then, of course, the trip was terrible in certain respects, but also incredibly beautiful and amazing in other respects. And also meeting certain monastics that were off the beaten path, actually, rather than the beaten path that I was supposed to, that I went to. But the monastics off the beaten path that weren't part of major institutions actually gave me faith in what is important, which is the Dhamma practice. But yes, it is very challenging, I have to say, as women monastics, and also just as women in general. You know, it's very easy, I would say, for me, as someone who is quote unquote a millennial, like the first millennial, I think, was 1981, to have such a sort of strong reaction going in a place like Thailand, where there's a different history of women's rights. But it made me also realize how much I take for granted the sort of rights. You know, like my mom was born in Italy at a time when women were not allowed to vote. That has not been my experience, and it's never something that I thought about. So in that sense, I realized I'm very entitled. And actually, even in the West, the human rights of women are very fragile because they're very recent. And it's thanks to a lot of women from, you know, past generations that have been doing all the work through which I was able to benefit, even when I was, you know, in fashion and in my sort of like little bubble inside the bubble where I didn't have to worry about a lot of different concerns. So yeah, I feel like in a lot of respects, we think that it's something sometimes from the past, at least us younger, even younger than me folks, particularly like 20 something. But in reality, it's not. And it's a very precarious and fragile ground. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. I went on a bit of a ramble.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of ways, it's like I hear my own story, basically. It's like, especially, like I come from a very progressive country in Holland. I could go to university, I could do basically anything I wanted. And then coming into this very conservative Buddhist establishment, I had not really prepared, because I just wanted to practice the Dhamma. And I had no idea that this was all part of it. And of course, I knew about, yes, Ajahn Brahm had only just started ordaining bhikkhunis, which gave a big uproar in the whole Buddhist establishment at the time. That still didn't click with me that there was something going on. I thought like, oh great, I can become a bhikkhuni now. But this constant like being reminded that you are seen as inferior by the surroundings and by other people is very, very pernicious. It's like basically like marketing and like all these constant advertisements you see, and then you think it might not affect you and that you're not going to buy that product, and somehow it still launches in your mind as somewhere, oh, that's a good product somewhere. But and I also started wondering about my own how far is this actually also a bit ingrained in myself as this idea of like like what is a woman really. I started to wonder for like, what is that? What is the difference between sex and it's like, okay, I got a female body, but does that mean I'm a woman? Is that like, is it that because of that I am going into a shop and I have to go for those racks that say women's clothing? Why is that? It's like, why do I have to, like, can I not wear something that's practical and but has to be something that's fashionable? And where there's also in our society, there is a lot of these things that have also launched in my mind, and I started also looking into those directions more. Of course, that has nothing to do with Buddhism, but it's just a result of how I started thinking in my practice. It's like, oh well, there's a lot more going on there than just for me very obvious discrimination in the Buddhist world. And yeah, like you, I also started taking it on and started thinking, it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this path. Maybe it isn't for me because I'm a woman, and maybe I should just practice well and then be reborn as a man in my next life. And then I was like, hold on, I'm starting to think exactly like all those mechis that I've been hearing, and like, this is not good. So yeah, I definitely hear in a lot of what you're saying in that. And I haven't actually been to Thailand as when I was a bhikkhuni. I have only been to Burma as a sailor. And yeah, although there was, at the time, I was very naive. I was very much like, okay, I'm just going there to practice, and okay, you get the robe on. I had no idea there was different robes for, okay, we had to wear this horrible pink, which I hated. But okay, other than that, I didn't see that there was so much of a difference. But there's also, because as a foreigner, as a Westerner, I was treated much differently, I think, also there, because of the local CLAs. And yeah, so I later on came to, I heard about Ajahn Brahm basically ordaining the bhikkhunis, and I just wanted to be part of that. But yeah, even in those circles, somehow I had not really realized that that was only the beginning of the problems, basically, for me. And yeah, it's been a big roller coaster ride for me to really, yeah, get through this, and to and like you said, also there are other monastics who are far more progressive, and who have helped me a lot along the way. And I think it was definitely thanks to them and some other Kalyanamitas that I've gone through that period. Because otherwise, I think if it was just me, I wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry that you had to go through all that you had to go through, and that women have to still go through a lot of really unpleasant situations. And I feel like it's the duty for all of us as monastics to uproot problems, these systemic issues that are within the institution of Buddhism. And that is actually what has matured. Actually, the reason why I'm still in robes was the realization that I put these robes on for the sake of liberation and not to be part of an institution. And that's where the problem pretty much is. It's in the institution of religion. So with any actually institutionalized religion, you find exactly the same problems. And that's what kind of a little bit removed the sting out of my sort of current situation, and also was a cold shower where I was able to somewhat objectively look at the experience. And you know, I was raised in a very secular way. My parents, I was baptized because we're all baptized in Italy once out of the womb by default, but my parents are very much scientific materialists, so they never really gave me any kind of Catholic indoctrination. So I defined myself as agnostic until I found the Buddhist faith. And I have to say, because actually it's such an intellectual religion in certain, or not necessarily, but a lot of Western monastics take it through that route, take it through that angle. When I found Buddhism, I thought, wow, this religion is really a unique religion, because it's basically kind of like not a religion, and you can really experience it and it makes sense. But it still is a religion. And when the more we actually practice, so the more we're no different than any other person that practices any type of religion. And when we see, you know, the problems that happen in Islam with women, or the problems that happen with Christianity, you know, in the Vatican, it's not that Catholic nuns have a much better situation. In fact, they're allowed to ordain as nuns because they're basically mendicants and don't have any money, but they're not allowed to be priests, simply because there is a separation between monastics and clergy, which does not exist within Buddhism. So, you know, I was actually talking to a friend of mine after my trip to Thailand, and he, even though he practices Buddhism, he was born Muslim, and he still practices Islam. And he was telling me about his relationship with his partner, a former partner, who was devout Muslim woman, and she was following some really strict kind of rules, where she was not allowed to dress in a certain way, go in a certain different places. And he was actually, because he's like very sort of progressive Muslim, he told her, girl, that book ain't doing you no good. And I remember when he said that, I thought, that's true, that book ain't doing me no good if I take it in that same way. And so that's what we should be careful, I feel, especially when it comes to human rights. We are capable, when we become very faithful in a religion, to justify a lot of awful things in the name of faith. And that's where instead, actually, especially in Buddhism, where the Buddha encourages us to investigate every single truth and not to take it as blind faith, we should be very careful and not get into that, oh yeah, well, if everybody tells me this, then I should, yeah, of course it's like this. Or even taking, I realized actually at the very beginning, I was quite taking everything as a working hypothesis. And now I'm like, actually, if it's against human rights, then it's an absolute no. It's no different than, you know, if tomorrow they find scriptures from the Buddha that you see that they say that the Buddha said the earth is flat, you know, like it's no different. So remembering, taking that approach, that it should not be in contradiction with science, and it should not be in contradiction with human rights, especially. And when it comes about, you know, women, it is about human rights. Whenever we are exposed with this sort of, or indoctrinated that there is something wrong or faulty by default in our state of being, very worrisome, very important to even not take it as a working hypothesis, but rather like remove it and say, this is not Dhamma, this is actually leading to craziness. So yeah, like, of course I have, once again, I'm very grateful to Bhante Sudaso, and actually to a lot of also monks that I know through, male monks that I know through Bhante Sudaso, that have been extremely supportive during this situation, also that I was traveling with in Thailand. But I have to say, there was still, like, the biggest thing has been for me to really contemplate, really understand, and really look at other actually religions and see how my mind would have a very neutral reaction towards that, like very much, sorry, not neutral, like actually like very decisive. I could see the black and white, because there was no attachment towards the practice. But when we become, you know, very faithful, obviously, you know, I got a robe on and they're full for awakening. I realized that then my mind can become a little confused. And it's no different with a lot of women that are in Thailand or in Asia that are actually indoctrinated since birth, that they, you know, are innately insane, that women are crazier, women are angrier because we have our periods, or, you know, we PMS, so clearly we can't attain awakening. And as we say here, we might have PMS, but you know, I have PMS, Aya has PMS, and Bhante has IMS, so, which is not the retreat center, but it's irritable male syndrome. So it's no different. It's like it just manifests in different shapes and form, but it's exactly, you know, and the Buddha talks about that actually in the Vasetta Sutta, that we get sometimes so focused on the differences of, you know, I've got brown eyes and brown hair, and this other person has blonde hair and blue eyes, and then we're radically different. There's something inherently different with us. No, it's no different than different qualities of tomatoes. You have San Marzano tomato, you have cherry tomatoes, you have plum tomatoes. They all have different shapes and forms, but we all recognize them as tomatoes. And that's pretty much the human nature. So it's our obsession, like we get obsessed with these details, but we're trying to actually transcend, like look at our actions and what we're doing. But yeah, I have to say it is obviously challenging for especially you know, than people who are in a less privileged situation than mine in this respect. Perhaps they're in a better funded monastery, but less supportive monastery. So here we're significantly less, like more precarious in terms of support, but it comes with a lot more freedom. And also the reminder of like why we put robes on altogether. Like, do we actually want to be a Buddhist priest in the sense of like having a career, or do I actually want to be a renunciant? And, you know, this was the first thing that I could not understand actually about the whole bhikkhuni ordination thing. I was like, why, like, they don't want to get women to become homeless. This is so bizarre. And, you know, I guess I was really naive, but I'm like makes no sense whatsoever. Then I realized, of course, yes, there's that, but there's also now, it's been 2,500 years after the Buddha, and especially in countries where Buddhism is significantly more present than in the West, actually being a monastic is a form of livelihood. So it can be a lot of monastics ordained, not necessarily out of faith, not out of sake of liberation, but to live a very comfortable life. And it's kind of like the only aristocracy that you can join. Not that case in the West, but in Asia it can be. So actually all of that, sometimes I think, ironically, it's almost a privileged situation if we can get it in the right way. Privilege, obviously, quote unquote, in the way that as, you know, having a female body will always be a sort of obstacle in attaining a lot of praise and gain and all of that. But actually what the Buddha talks about, praise and gain being one of the biggest obstacles, a big pile of feces, like the dung beetle eating full of dung on this mountain of dung and looking at all the other, you know, dung beetles and going, oh, I have more dung than you do. So that was actually, after a while, my experience being in Thailand. After a while, I was like, oh yeah, well, they're all eating a lot of dung, a lot of feces. And like, so sometimes because we're unenlightened, we get fixated with that. But, you know, always reminding myself that at the same time, it's also important to uproot the problems of systemic misogyny, because having then other female practitioners having to deal with those thoughts in the mind really can lead to craziness, really can lead to more problems within their practice. So on one hand, it's a gift, it's a blessing. On the other hand, it can be a big obstacle. So let's remove the obstacle and keep the blessing, I would say.
I'd like to just come back to you, what you said about like the investigation of what did the Buddha really say and what was actually added later. And there's been a lot of research been done in the early Buddhist texts already to allow bhikkhunis to be ordained in the first place. That was a direct result of the study of early Buddhist texts, but also a lot of these passages that where certain people call upon of ways like, see, women are inferior, you can see that actually came was put in a later date if you start investigating that. And it's a little bit difficult, but it seems to have come in fairly early on after the Buddha's death. A lot of these things seem to have changed, like in the first 100 years after that. And I for my own research, I suspect, and what you see at the same time happening is that terms like pandaka start coming into the texts as well, and which are not in the actual early Buddhist suttas, but they come in also in that first 100 years, and they come in the same part of the Vinaya as the rules on bhikkhuni ordination. And so they seem to be sort of related to that. It's certainly all these questions also about your gender and whatever in the ordination procedures. because nobody really know what a Pandaka is, but there is actually a lot of, especially in traditional Buddhist countries, there's a lot of ideas of what it is. And so there's a lot of people say it's gay people or trans people or something like that. And there is no proof of any of that at all in the texts. Also, it seems to have come in later, and from my own research, it actually comes from a Jain Order. And when you look into the Jain Order, it's what you have here is an order that was at the same time as the Buddha, also fairly big order, and what they, a lot of them, or a large portion of them, were naked ascetics. But the women were not allowed to do that because that was shameful for women. So women could not reach the enlightenment because they had to cover up their body. So that was, but there was also this notion of Pandaka that came in there, and that is most likely eunuchs. So that's, if like you can imagine that in an order of naked men, it's kind of obvious when somebody does not have those parts, right? So that's why those things were in their Vinaya, in their monastic rules. And they have probably through pressure from, after the Buddha died, of course, there must have been confusion. It's like the leader was gone, nobody anymore to make decisions really on how to do things. And there was a lot of pressure from the society, from other orders, on how they should be behaving and how they should be doing things. Of course, there might have been some existential fears of, well, are people still going to support us if we don't do what they want? I think a whole lot of these things started coming into play after the Buddha died, and because of that, a lot of these terms have been brought in, and all these discriminatory passages have towards women as well towards LGBTIQ have been brought in at that time. And of course, it's always difficult to actually prove that, but it looks like, from the research that I've done, it really looks like it's coming from that direction. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, it really helped me just to look into that. It's like, hold on, this is not what the Buddha said. Mm-hmm. And it also, like you said, when you look at the actual teachings, there's nothing in the actual teachings of, all these things come from the Vinaya, right? There's nothing in the actual teachings that says that women cannot attain enlightenment or whatever. And there's this wonderful poem of your where you're named after Ayasoma, where also these the misogynistic words of like, oh, women can't reach enlightenment and whatever, they're put in the mouth of the devil, of Mara.
Yeah.
So that is where this comes from. So it is not from the Buddha that says this, it's Mara that says this. So if you start investigating these things and looking into it, it becomes very clear. And for me, that has been really helpful to overcome my own confusion, actually, as to what is right and what's wrong here. But it's already 8:10, and if there's anybody who has a question, so please type it in chat, or you can do a raise hand thing somewhere, I think, on the participants list. And I should be able to see that. I can't see you, or I can see only a few of you. So if you raise your hand, I can't see you. Like if you raise your hand like this, I can't see you. So please, please do either raise hand if you want to say something, and I'll unmute you, or or type it in the chat box to me, and then I'll read it out. And in the meantime, we can maybe talk a little bit further as well.
Yeah, no, I noticed that as well, actually, that in the text, actually, what I found really interesting is also what my mind was veering towards, and in the sense that actually when you see the suttas, what the Buddha says is, you know, towards the fact that actually gender is just one of a million different identities, self-identities that we need to get rid of, and it has very little, if no importance at all. And in fact, I was named after Bhikkhuni Soma by my preceptor specifically for, actually, because it was, Bhante Sudaso told her it was my favorite suttas, so one of my favorite suttas. And when I first read the Soma Samyutta, I was like, oh yeah, Bhikkhuni Soma. Yeah, that's great. But yeah, the mind tends to veer towards the, you know, little passages where there's actually a lot of Dhamma. They're concentrated with Dhamma. And that's where I think the doubt, you know, actually when the Buddha talks about the 5 hindrances, actually, in terms of not giving nutriment to doubt, he says specifically that, not to engage the mind into arguments, to subjects that arouse doubt. And I've seen that a lot, actually, because I would read 2 suttas that would say misogynist things, and I would go, and then like 10 suttas where it's the opposite, but my mind would still gravitate towards those 2. So really looking at what we're doing with our minds, and also understanding that obviously it's been 2,500 years of mostly unenlightened disciples of the Buddha, and a few enlightened beings, obviously, but the majority of the followers, including myself, are currently unenlightened. So of course, we all come with our baggage and cultural conditioning of one shape or form. I mean, I see how strong my Italian cultural conditioning is. Now that I work with someone who is American, for example, like from Anglo-Saxon descent, like Bhante Sudaso and I like get along really well, but we have radically different cultural conditioning. European, he's American, like there's so many different dynamics, which is helpful actually to see how, you know, all of these things come into place. And obviously, whatever was the expectation after the Buddha died, then of course it was uncomfortable for women to be, you know, pursuing enlightenment instead of procreating at home a bunch of children. Also thinking that pretty much not any, but most religions that I'm aware of worldwide, including Christianity, like put as a big focus procreation. And Buddhism is actually one of the few that does not, where like having children, for example, is not necessarily like a good thing. But in Christianity, you have sex in order to procreate. That should be the whole purpose. At least that is Catholicism. That's what the Pope, I remember, would say, like in the 90s, whenever I would hear him, oh yeah, you shouldn't use condoms because you should only have sex to procreate. And we're like, okay, well, I don't know if that's very relevant these days, but so similarly with homophobia, there is not one, you know, the Buddha never seems in the early text to ever be concerned about who someone is having sex with, but rather it's, well, it's rather, you know, having sex to begin with that one should eliminate, you know, take out of the picture, because obviously it's a very strong form of greed. But if that is not the case, then the precept is obviously just in terms of making sure not to betray the trust of he doesn't talk even about monogamy, like it's completely okay to have multiple partners. Like the Buddha doesn't seem too concerned and like who are the people engaging in sexual act, just as long as it's consensual. And you see that it's the same actually in the Mahayana tradition. And it's only in the Tibetan tradition that apparently there was like one commentator that became extremely famous that wrote a bunch of homophobic stuff, which is why then this belief within the Tibetan tradition that you know, having homosexual sex is bad karma, where it comes from, and why the Dalai Lama actually held that view up until recently, somewhat recently, until a decade ago. And then he was like, actually, I am wrong. I was wrong. I am sorry about that. And he actually came to terms with it. And it was because of an individual. And it's no different, actually. Venerable Khandro Rinpoche in the Tibetan tradition, who is this really incredible female monastic that I quite love and admire, very strong-willed. Similarly, she's the daughter of a famous male Rinpoche in Tibet, and of the Mind rolling tradition. And she talks about it as how growing up, she went up to her father and going like, what is this stuff? Like, like, you know, the teachings of the Buddha talk about how gender is not an obstacle towards awakening, but then all these people say the exact opposite. And, you know, her father started laughing and telling her like, well, actually, you know, a lot of these things are opinions of people. So it's your duty to realize it for yourself, to realize the Dhamma for yourself. That's why you're practicing, not to follow that opinion or that opinion or that opinion or that opinion, rather realizing that these are all just, you know, thoughts and of unenlightened beings until we attain awakening. Like, we can't really have a full understanding of exactly everything. So of course, yeah, I mean, the Buddha was not only an awakened being, but also woke. And after him, people were not awakened and nor not woke either. So it was a bit of a disaster, I guess.
Yes, the Buddha seemed to have recognized the society that he was in and the people that were there, and it was quite obvious, I think, also from Vinaya, that homosexuality is recognized in that. Yeah. The only thing it basically says about that is that as a monk, you just don't engage in that. It's the same as if you're like, if you're heterosexual or homosexual, doesn't matter. You just don't engage in that if you want to follow the monastic path. And so there doesn't seem to be any indication there that a gay man cannot ordain. Yeah. Because there were obviously monks that were, and so and the same you see also for transgenders. The Buddha always deals with things in a very matter-of-factly way, and the story in the video about transgenders is actually quite funny in a way, because it seems to have somebody seems to change gender overnight in his sleep. Yeah. It seems a bit unrealistic, but if you think about it, like, they did not have like the same possibilities as you did nowadays. There were no such things as surgery and etc. So I don't know how they I've actually looked this up, but it is actually possible for a female to transform into a male in puberty by itself. So that could have happened, but the way that all these teachings tend to deal with these matters is very simple of okay, well, then you just go to the other monastery. Then you just go to the nuns' monastery, or you just go to the monks' monastery, and that's it. And not like, oh, you're not supposed to be ordained, or you have to disrobe or whatever. It's just like, oh, okay, just keep on practicing and just practice in a different place, and that's it. So there doesn't seem to be anything against any of these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's my impression of the Vinaya as well, that it's an instrument, that it's a vehicle to attain awakening. So it's very matter-of-factly and very practical. It's not a matter of, you know, the commandments, like you should do this, but rather it's, you want these results, you practice this way. And then obviously taking into consideration specific things that were happening back at the time of the Buddha, then of course he would address them as they came into being in the most practical way, like just someone who is organizing a system that needs to be, yeah, that it's not a legalistic, at least this is my interpretation. I find it very bizarre when people become very legalistic about it feels to me like if you really want to be a lawyer, then might as well go to Manhattan and at least get paid top dollars for that. But rather it's supposed to be an instrument for that helps us to go towards liberation. And obviously there are so many different things that are part of the human experience that the Buddha had to address in one shape or form. And some that I think weren't addressed just because they didn't come up at the time, but they are not, it doesn't mean that that is something that is negative towards a group of people or that he had anything against. It doesn't say much about, I think, the group of people, but rather just about the fact that it didn't come into being. It wasn't a practical matter at the time. This is my impression anyway.
We only have about 8 minutes left. Is there anybody who wants to say something? I think I see Esther nod. Would you like me to unmute you, Esther? Okay. I can't see all of you, so if you have to send me a I have to ask.
That's someone nodding, so I think it was a yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I tried my best to write in the chat, but I'm so slow. Thank you very much for this lovely, if it's the right word, discussion. And as we have a third bhikkhuni here watching, I don't see her now. Anupama. I really would be interested to hear something about her experience, if this would be okay.
Okay, she's unmuted.
Okay, muted. Well, maybe first to say I'm not a bhikkhuni. I am a 10-precept nun, so to speak, a Sayalay. I have ordained in Burma, and maybe that may just also link to the topic. Burma is one of the countries who is not recognizing bhikkhuni ordination. In fact, it's illegal. And the option you have in Burma is to ordain 10 precepts. The usual are 8 precepts, and that's basically which my nun's career has been. I have lived several years in Myanmar, and maybe on that point, that's where I have been growing or grown up in my monastic training, in that quite conservative context, and basically not offering women the same opportunities. And Burma probably is one of the most orthodox countries about or around that. Having said that, it also means that the nuns in Burma, as well as in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Sri Lanka, there have been orders developed over the centuries for nuns, for women to practice, but not to ordain as bhikkhunis. And these orders have actually been, they're quite established within societies and also quite recognized, but there is a definite hierarchical imbalance and structure. And so basically that's all you can do, ordain up to 10 precepts, but not take full bhikkhuni ordination. So my experience has been in that context. That has been my, how to say, my birth, kind of birth bringing up the first few years. And then only in 2015, I came out of Burma, of this bubble, so to speak, the cultural bubble, and came out to Australia and realized there's a whole different world. That doesn't mean that I didn't know about bhikkhuni ordination, but similarly, my motivation was very much practice-based, and to practice the Dharma and the meditation in a Buddhist context. And at the time, that was what was available. And I haven't thought much further. But of course, living in that context, soon very much I learned the difference, because similar than Ayagunatsari, who came to Thailand and then suddenly was confronted with the inequality, I haven't really experienced that until I was in it, and then even more so as a nun. And then it was pretty like straightforward in the way, well, what do I do about this here as a German foreigner sitting in Burma wanting to practice the Dharma? Am I going to rock the boat, or am I going to, what's the priority? Am I going to make peace with it as it is right now and try to develop in the Dharma, and perhaps on a larger scale, on a longer run, something can be changed? But maybe I, as a foreigner in Burma, cannot change it, because ultimately the change has to come from within. And that's also one of the things, you know, with all good intentions, us Westerners going over and trying to sort things out may not land very well in these contexts. But we had quite a few experiences, and quite interestingly, just before this discussion, I was actually on a call with my Dharma sister, Ayagunatsari, who spoke a few weeks ago and gave a wonderful Dharma talk from Myanmar, who is based there at the university and originally from Lithuania. And we have ordained together, and we had just a conversation, and with respect to some of the experiences we shared 7 years ago in our first nuns experience. And obviously there was quite, she also found it quite difficult. We both found it quite difficult at the beginning. And then, as I said, there was this kind of a bit of a decision. Am I going to torment my mind about this, or am I going to practice and then see what wisdom can grow and how things can maybe change and develop on a larger scheme? So we just recalled a few situations which have been very clearly, I described a certain situation where it was very clearly made to me that this is a female body and being placed in a particular place in a context. And I think it almost reminded me to some certain situation when something happened, when it comes to who is the guilty one. It is the woman. And I think in these conservative traditional contexts, there's a lot of cultural hangover, and things are moving, but they are moving slowly. And I think all we can do is keeping the relationships going and mutual understanding, because I'm here now in the West, and I'm still, so to speak, a 10 precept nun and not a bhikkhuni, even if the possibility is given. And there are also certain reasons as to why, because I think it's also important to recognize the diversity and what women actually have developed and built up and believed in, like my Dharma mother in Burma, who has ordained at the age of 9. She's now 58. She has not known any other life than this as a nun, and to also recognize that within the wider landscape of female monastics. Now, that's just my particular experience, so I hope that has given you a little bit of an impression.
Thank you for sharing, Aya. We haven't really talked about the situation of bhikkhunis in different countries. There's quite a few good documentaries about that. But yeah, my preceptor is Ayagunatsari. She's the first Burmese bhikkhuni. Because of that, she actually comes from a fairly well-to-do family in Rangoon, which was also quite well known with like a lot of the same family from the government, etc. But she can never go back. And there was another nun that ordained with her. She did go back because her father fell ill, and she was immediately arrested and put in jail. And it's been very traumatic for her. She has eventually, under international pressure, come out. There are some resources on the internet also with her story, and it's been very, very traumatic for her. And in the end, she had to, she disrobed. She did take up robes again after she was how do you say that, exported? No, put over the border to Sri Lanka, and but she could not keep that, and at the moment she lives as a layperson in America, still very traumatized. And these there is a third one that we know of, but at the moment I don't know where she is. It's something we're still working on and trying to help. So yes, Burma is the most close to that. It's also in the law that bhikkhunis don't exist, that it's not possible. There's also in Thailand, there are some bhikkhunis, although they're not recognized by the government, they also can't do anything about it because the law is different there. And therefore, because the laws go from the premise that there's only bhikkhus, that there's only male monks, and therefore the laws don't apply to these women. And so they can basically do what they want, but they're not recognized as that, or they're recognized only as sort of Mahayana nuns. They're not recognized as Theravada, but there is more and more growing support for them from the communities where they're at, who see that they're practicing well, and that so they get alms food, and so that's slowly growing, that understanding in Thailand. Sri Lanka is the most forward moving in that, even though it is not officially recognized. I think it's probably fairly recognized by the population that bhikkhunis are there, and that they're practicing well. And so that's sort of the situation in those countries. In the Mahayana countries, I don't quite know. In Tibet, it has the problem that bhikkhuni ordination was never introduced there in the first place. And in China, there is many bhikshunis, and also in places in Taiwan, Vietnam, etc. So that's a very short little summary of the Asian, the traditional world. But yeah, we've been mainly talking about our own experiences as Western women who ordain in a system that is definitely not our own. Is not where we come from, and the differences that we had to face on them because of that. Right. Is there anybody else who wants to say something, or?
I would like to, if that's okay, I don't know if I'm on. I would like to just say, follow up on actually what you just mentioned in terms of all the different lineages, so Mahayana, Vajrayana, and Theravada. That from my experience running a non-sectarian organization here in New York City and being constantly in touch with so many different monastics, is that actually you see how, for example, since in the Mahayana tradition, and especially in Taiwan, there is the most quote-unquote gender equality, and actually in Taiwan the majority of the monastics are actually women. It does reflect, like the system does reflect into the training of the monastics and in their access to Dhamma altogether. So in their overall growth in both as teachers, as understanding, as being able, empowered to move along in the path. And the more there are restrictions, the more there is oppression, actually, the more it's limited, the development is limited. So that is what I've actually realized, because at the very beginning, before I got robes on, I was like, well, who cares? I mean, in the end, who cares to have an ordination? I wasn't particularly, I never thought that I actually wanted to ordain as a religious figure in general. But the reason why I did was actually because I've seen how powerful it is to take precepts formally, and not necessarily for the outer world, but mentally for myself, that there was a huge difference, for example, between taking the 5 precepts formally and practicing the 5 precepts here and there whenever I wanted. And obviously having a sort of environment in which then I was supported in my practice. And so that's the biggest problem that I see, is that actually a lot of times when women ordain, actually, they have less opportunities than lay women within the Theravada tradition to actually have access to teachings, for example, to senior monastics. So, and it so happens that the majority of senior monastics, if not all the senior monastics actually, are male. So when you have such a big giant gender segregation, and you're defined from that, and the more precepts you take formally, the more you are distanced from them, that is extremely problematic. And that is when it comes into the field of actually human rights and spiritual rights. So that's personally something that I really have at heart, and that I've seen how kind of detrimental it has been, paradoxically for me, to ordain, not within Buddhist Insights, obviously, because I have, when we invite people, obviously they kind of follow the sort of the way of the organization, but whenever I go outside, so ironically I have more access to teachings here because we invite monastics rather than going outside, and definitely other female monastics don't have access altogether to a lot of monastics, even within, even if they live close by. It's very, very problematic, which is why, actually running a dual gender monastery and dual gender organization, at a certain point, actually, I won't deny, I thought, this is a really bad idea. It's quite, not for the reasons that they generally tell you about temptations and whatever and Mara and blah, 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 because it also it runs under the assumption that everybody is straight and everybody has a certain sexual preferences. That's besides the point. But rather because you're always put in second place. So I shared actually at the talk you mentioned, one of the biggest lessons that I came actually after Thailand to me was, I always heard, yeah, like women have the same capabilities for awakening of men, but I was like, but where are all these women monastics, like throughout the history? So we have the same capability, but where are these women? And it was interesting because we were in this famous monastery at a certain point, and Bhante was sharing with everybody that we were both running the same organization, and we were going around with these two other monks, male monks, friends of ours, and at a certain point they took a picture and then they posted it afterwards, and I am completely removed out of that picture, and the caption is Bhante Suddazo, the founder of Buddhist Insights, together with such and such other monks that have anything to do with Buddhist Insights. And it occurred to me there, in that moment, why there are no female teachers. And this goes across every field of like human history. Where are the women artists? Where are the women writers? Where are the women in any type of field? So they're canceled, they're like cut out, they're cropped from the picture. So it's not that they don't exist, it's not that they don't do anything, it's rather that they are not given the possibility to, they're put in a sort of like place, and this prevents a lot of other people from just accessing, in particular, obviously we're talking in Buddhism, to just practice the Dhamma in a way that is conducive to liberation. Because that's the biggest problem to me, actually, of these systems of oppression. They're not about labels or about, like, honestly, I find it quite ridiculous that the whole obsession with food, I was like, oh, I thought, in Italy we were so obsessed with food, but it seems like, who goes in line with the food, me first, you first, the first. I was like, I'm fine to go always for the rest of my life at the end of the line. And like, actually, it would be quite liberating, so I don't have to go through this thing. But, it's, there's so much, it's so much fluff that actually prevents us from really practicing the teaching. So that's why I decided to keep on, enduring a lot of the unpleasantness in a dual gender monastery to help to give my sort of passive contribution to the cause. All our, the senior monastics who have been around and about at the very beginning, before there was no such thing as ordination in any kind of recognized ordination within the Theravada tradition or the Tibetan tradition for that matter, have been through incredible suffering, incredible pain, in order to actually make it so much easier for all of us to practice. I don't think personally I would have ever had that strength. I've been, as I shared earlier, I was planning on quitting pretty fairly soon for a lot less, unpleasant treatments than they had to go through. But at the same time, I feel that because we have this sort of female body, whether we like it or not, it is paramount to really use it for the benefit of others and really prevent or try to remove as much suffering, as much unnecessary suffering for other women to go forth, so that it becomes less and less. Create places for practice where gender is not an issue, because we have to talk about gender, not because I care about gender that much, or Ayagunatsari cares about gender that much, or Ayagunatsari cares about gender that much, because everybody else seems to care about gender so much. Like, it's really, wow, I've never been told so much how female I was. I thought I was even androgynous. That's delusion, but but it's such a big thing in the outer world, and that's what we need to, I guess, an androgynous Buddhism would be kind of kind of nice, where we can actually focus on the core of the practice without having to worry on all these statuses and positions in line and all these whatever papancha. Anyway, that was just what I wanted to say. So in the Mahayana tradition, they have a lot less than that. That.
For me personally, I really wanted to take up ropes, because I felt that the Buddhist teachings can't really spread in the West unless there is some form of equality, at least between men and women, and to a larger extent also LGBTIQ. And so that's also one reason why I decided to come out as LGBTI as non-binary, is to say, it's like, hey, this is okay, this is also for you, and this is also for these teachings are for everybody, and they basically have like nothing. It's for everybody. It's for all people, and it's not about gender. Everybody has the same possibility to get enlightenment, to learn the teachings and to benefit from them.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, like half of the people, I think at Buddhist Insights more or less identify as LGBTQI plus, not because we put any kind of like advertisement, but just because actually if once you practice what you preach, then it's naturally inclusive for everyone, when it's not a problem. Like, we never really have this problem like that we have to like create. Also because obviously Bhante Suttazo is a pretty young monk, so actually he went through a lot of suffering as well. Being a young, he was like 21 or something when he ordained. So just imagine all of a sudden he's told that the tradition in which he's ordained, they are oppressing women. And that was a big loss, like moment of shake of his faith. He actually had considered, I don't know if I should share it, but I will share it anyway. He had considered there to disrobe, actually, because he didn't feel comfortable being in a religion that discriminated on people. So it's really important also to see that a lot of male monks are extremely uncomfortable to be part of a system of oppression of a particular group of women, a group of humans that happen to be female bodied. So there's a lot of, like, it's really something that it's more than it's a bigger problem than just for, you know, just a few people. And that's when the practice becomes exclusive, because then it just caters to just a few people who all have the same sort of anachronistic, gendered view and approach of the teachings. And the majority of, I would say, definitely young people, gender, you know, not straight and not gender conformist, they feel naturally excluded. And I also saw that actually with reflecting about the tradition that I was sort of born in and realized in. You know, in Italy, the majority of the people that I know are not Catholic. They don't practice Catholic. Catholicism is irrelevant to them. And one of the biggest things is because as an institution, the Catholic Church has oppressed groups of people like the LGBTQI+ community for countless years. So actually, that was one of the reasons why I never really thought that it was relevant to my experience. It had been oppressing most of the friends that I had. There were the messages that were brought were not really, they didn't seem wholesome. They didn't seem something pertinent. So of course, if we keep on holding to that form in Buddhism, then we are actually doing a disservice to the triple gem. We are we're basically raising walls that are obstacles for more and more people to actually approach the Dhamma. And my experience has been that whenever we remove that, and intentionally sometimes I have to remind myself that because I'm a woman, perhaps it's not a good thing for me to be behind the scenes all the time. Like I have to intentionally put myself in a sort of like visual, even though I'm actually all my life, even in as a career, I always like to take a behind the scene role. But now I realize it's very important because I have this body to send the right message. Otherwise, other women will always go to the kitchen. They think that that is their role, or that this organization is just another replica of everything that they've seen. So this can be either a burden or it can be a practice of compassion, of really thinking what is beneficial. And what I found is that even though at the very beginning I was very resistant and hated the hell out of doing things like we're doing right now, like public talks, speaking to groups of people that I didn't know. And I thought that my nature, like I wanted to be free to just do my own practice and be behind the scenes. That when I started thinking this is for the sort of a larger goal, then it actually has been also incredibly good for my practice for moving forward in the Dhamma. So I encourage all of you, female-bodied, to just keep that in mind, that whenever we do certain, actions through body, speech, and mind, we're actually having a lot of influence on other people. And so we can all do our best, and hopefully we can uproot all these unnecessary causes of dukkha and focus on greed, hatred, and delusion, full stop, which is already like a lot of dukkha right there, without institutionalized greed, hatred, and delusion. Let's just work with the uninstitutionalized greed, hatred, and delusion. All right.
Thank you very much, Aya. I think we were already running 20 minutes over time. So,
wow.
But thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. And
thank you for having me.